afternoon, everyone. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I know other people will be joining us. So I want to give a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today. We have a treat, two incredible educators who have joined us in another webinar, in a series of webinars that explores how dialogue can be an effective tool for exploring the political and ideological and religious polarization, and just wondering why that's happening in our country, and really understanding how dialogue can be an effective tool. So this webinar series is made possible by the generous support from the Templeton Religion Trust, Andrew and Julie Klingenstein Family Fund, and the Cousins Foundation. So today we are going to be really focusing on why we are seeing so much anger and outrage around cultural issues, and why we're seeing some families being torn apart and other people don't want to talk with anyone who don't agree with their own particular perspective. We seem to be wanting to stay in our silos, and we've seen this over the last few years, and it doesn't seem to be stopping or changing. So what in the world is going on? So today we're going to be exploring what actually happens in the brain when a person feels that their deepest beliefs are being challenged. And then we'll explore how this impacts the school community, particularly the classroom. Over the last several years, it's been my own personal experience as both an educator and a consultant that I've heard more and more teachers say that they are hesitant to bring any controversial issue into the classroom because they feel ill-equipped to deal with the heat, not only from students, but also from parents. But as educators, what does it mean if we don't provide a space for students to learn about the many different perspectives around the complex issues that are, really impacting our country right now? Can we really say that we are equipping them to be leaders in this complex world? Is there a way to create a space to have meaningful conversations around controversial issues and to use the heat to actually transform our understandings, to challenge assumptions, and to gain deeper understandings around the different perspectives on these complex issues? So we do have these two extraordinary educators with us today, KiKi Davis and Linda McGuire, who are going to share their wisdom from decades of experience working in school communities. So what I've asked both KiKi and Linda to do is to start out telling us a little bit about themselves, about their work as educators, especially in this past year during this very polarized time, especially during the pandemic and everything that we've seen in this past year. And then I have some very specific questions that I'm going to ask them to dig into the issues that we're going to focus on. But I also want to make sure that we have your questions answered as well. So we'll leave some time at the end for you to ask our panelists some of the questions that you have. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And so why don't we start out with you, KiKi? If you could tell us a little bit about your work and what it's really been like as an educator, supporting students as they really navigated the polarization in this past year.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. As Kristen mentioned, my name is KiKi Davis. I'm the Director of Institutional Equity and Diversity at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes School. It's my 11th year at St. Stephen's St. Agnes. I've been a diversity practitioner for almost 20 years. And part of that has been facilitating challenging but necessary conversations around so many topics that often could often polarize a community. So I've been doing this for a while. This year has been an extraordinary year, not so much with the amount of conversations that have been facilitated, but I think with the participation, I think we've had a greater breadth of folks who have joined the conversation. Generally in my conversations, we're very much the quote unquote choir, but we've had a lot of people with a lot of different perspectives, and it's really given us an opportunity to put to practice our respectful discourse curriculum and our dialogue skills, which Kristen has been so instrumental in helping us develop. And so we've spent a lot of times with both the adults on our community and the students on our community creating the skill of dialogue, so that they know how to talk to each other regardless of the content. And then we've put into place some really intentional spaces for that to happen. It has been challenging, as we set our sight on a focus on race, and because the world is what the world is, that we've had to pivot a couple times and bring in new and more relevant and kind of timely conversations as well. So we've really spent our time focusing on teaching folks how to talk to each other, the importance of talking to each other, the benefit of respectful discourse. And that, I think, has been helpful in having that created from an institutional place as well, kind of top down and bottom up. We've been working on this work through the year. So it's been challenging, but I have to say it's been a spectacularly rewarding year as well.
Thank you so much, KiKi. And Linda, please tell us a little bit about your role and what the experience has been like in this past year, helping students to navigate these extraordinary times.
So hi, everybody. My name's Linda McGuire. I want to apologize in advance because I do have a really obnoxious cough that I can't seem to kick. So I come at my job. I'm the Dean of Students at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. I come at my job as somebody that has a master's in social work and for years was a school counselor before I was a Dean of Students. And I'm 58 and I've worked with teenagers since I was 24 years old. So I'm somebody that really understands the teen brain and also feel like I understand sort of what teens need inside from all those years as a school counselor. So coming into this particular year with all its many challenges, even though one of my primary roles is making sure that the rules are adhered to and that the handbook is adhered to and that students are dressed right and act right, I really feel like meeting the kids where they are and making sure that all of our students feel really supported during this tough time. That's an even more important job for me. And I do think that this is a generation of students that hasn't been challenged in sort of a global way, the way that they've been challenged this year. And at the same time is a group that feels things more passionately and more strongly than generations before. So those things coupled together, the idea that they haven't really dealt with a lot of like global challenges, they haven't sort of lived through a war, they haven't lived through, the crash of 2008, they're too young to have appreciated that. And so bringing that set of sort of naive understanding of the world and feeling like their biggest problem is, getting into college, with this set of really extreme, passionate feelings politically and about what's happening in our world today has made it a tough year and a time where most importantly, we need to provide students a place to share with one another. And we have done that quite a bit this year. And I've done that in concert with both of these wonderful women and have provided our students with opportunities to talk to each other and to hear one another's feelings. But it is hard to be in a school environment where most of the teenagers feel one way and some of the teenagers feel a different way, and making sure that everybody feels like they're loved and supported at our school, which is something that's really important to us. And it's a school with an Episcopal tradition, and we're trying to come at it from that tradition and really care for the spiritual lives of our kids. So teaching our kids discourse and teaching our kids how to dialogue about difficult conversations has been one of the primary things we have done this year, and taking it slow and letting students understand that first they need to learn how to talk about the situations before they can really dig in deep. It's been rewarding, though. I do think that our students have learned to listen. And I think that they are beginning to understand that people come at these issues from all different angles, and that everybody has a backstory, and that just assuming that a person is fully aligned with their thought in that moment is a problem, because especially with teenagers who change their mind often, who go back and forth on issues. So, we have dug deep into the idea of these sort of safe conversations as a place where perhaps the heat can get turned up a bit. And I do understand the fear that faculty members have in their classroom because they feel like they don't have the set of skills to manage these strong emotions. And so that's something that we also have been trying to do, is help our faculty to be able to manage that. We're not 100% there yet, but that's what we've been working on.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that. And I want to stay with that as, one of the big things that we want to explore during this particular webinar is what in the world is going on with our brains? Why are we seeing so much outrage? Why are we seeing so much anger? Why are we seeing, families ripped apart? Why are we seeing, people respond in ways, whether on social media or in person, that we can't imagine. 10 years ago, people responding that way. What in the world is going on? We know that there has been a lot of research recently done about the brain and trying to figure out what is happening, what's happening in the brain when when we feel like some of those deepest beliefs that we have are being challenged. And it's interesting, I've done some reading on this, and I know that Jonah Kaplan from the USC's Brain and Creativity Institute, been reading about some of his work. And one thing that he said really kind of struck me when he said that there is a belief, if there is a belief that the brain considers to be part of who we are. So this is a deep belief. This isn't just kind of, my favorite ice cream is. This is a deep, deep belief. Then the brain turns on its self-defense mode to actually protect that belief. So Linda, can you shed a little bit more light on what is happening in our brain, and why do we as adults, those of us who are adults, experience this immediate anger or this outrage? And then certainly we've seen these flashpoints, not only with parents in the community, teachers, but with students. What's going on?
So when we get flooded, like when we feel like we need to protect our belief system, we go full into fight, flight, or freeze. It feels so primal when we're flooded with our emotions. And anybody's ever been a parent has had the experience of being so overflooded with their emotions that all their best parenting, it gets thrown out the window. And even if we, sort of know the way we're supposed to be acting and we know the way we want to be behaving, when we get overcome with those emotions, all bets are off. We really are no longer working from the place of the brain that's cogent and logical. We are in a primal state. And some of these topics are they become moral issues for us. And they become issues around how we were raised, like what our core belief systems are. And it feels very threatening to have somebody sort of come in and not share those same core beliefs. Then if you are a teenager, you already have an incredible flood of emotions and an incredible amount of hormonal activity that's happening already. And that stress hormone cortisol that comes in and just like absolutely takes over the entire body, our entire brain, makes it so it's difficult to function. People can start to like breathe really, really heavy. Their faces feel hot. They begin to feel enraged, and you are no longer able to listen to yourself, let alone listen to someone else. And unfortunately, a lot of the political issues that we're dealing with right now feel like moral issues to people. People become so guarded and so entrenched in the way that they were brought up, what their religious belief system is, what their worldview is. And so for teenagers who already have so much hormonal activity to be dealing with all of this flooding, they become really, really hot and really dug in, becomes extremely problematic. For their parents, the way in which you are raising your kids is so important to you. And it's really all about those fundamental moral issues that you think are important as a family. And because so many of these political issues rub right up against those, parents become really protective of the way that they've raised their kids. And so they ask questions like, is my child going to feel safe at your institution if they have differing views? What they're really saying is like, are you going to respect the way that I've raised my child? And is my child still going to feel good about the way that we've raised them? And is my child still going to align their thinking with mine? During the teenage years, it is really age appropriate for teenagers to begin to think very differently from their parents, but it is threatening as a parent. And so around these political issues, it can raise its ugly head that there's a fear that if you're discussing these topics, with my child may begin to veer in a different direction than our thinking is. And so parents, they don't want these topics discussed. They'll say things like, I only want to have these conversations at home. I don't think it's for the school to have these, to talk about these belief systems. Are you trying to change the way in which my child believes and thinks? And then you have a teenager who is not just protecting their viewpoint at this point, but they are protecting the viewpoint of their parents. So they're even more dug in. Even if they don't agree with their parents, they feel like they're protecting the viewpoint of the parents. So that amount of emotional flooding makes it so important, makes it so difficult to engage in conversation, and makes it so important that there's structures in place that can help a person sort of breathe through it and begin to get out of that fear, flight, or fright response.
Thank you. That's so helpful, Linda. So let's talk about some of these structures. And I know these are structures that we've worked really hard to build in our school community, but I know there are school communities and higher education universities that have worked really, really hard to build these spaces. So there are two phrases that often come up when we talk about dialogue: a safe space and a brave space. And I know there's been controversy around both of these, both of these terms. And so, KiKi, can you help us figure out what is a good definition for both kind of safe space and brave space? And, to talk about why it's not either or, that we actually need both of them, right?
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, and I think that that's part of the misconception, is that you either have a safe space or you have a brave space, and it's not. You can have both, and you should have both. I do think that when you create a safe space, it is a space where people can come together and be vulnerable. And learn how to have the conversations as opposed to diving them in. And that's what we've created this year with so many of our faculty and our students. We wanted to teach them and provide a space where it was okay to make mistakes, to ask the questions, and to feel, like I said, vulnerable. A safe space allows for the optimal learning environment where there's a lack of judgment, where you don't feel like you have to defend your perspective. We always say it's not a debate, right? Dialogue is not a debate. And so we're really teaching them that that the difference, we're starting and teaching the difference between belief and behavior, right? So we're really focusing on giving them the words and helping them articulate what they believe and what they know and what they don't know, right? And so this is kind of the safe space is a place of self-awareness. It's where a person can do their individual work in the most trusted, open, nurturing environment possible. And then what you want them to do is feel empowered, right, by the skills that they've gotten in that safe space, that they can move to brave spaces, right, where there might not be that intentional safety mechanism, right? There might be different people and different opportunities. And this is where they play out those dialogue skills, right? This is where dialogue comes into play. This is where they are thinking critically about what they know and what they don't know, right? And so there might be a few more questions asked. And it's still not a debate. It's never a debate. Dialogue is never a debate, but it is an opportunity for them to listen more to other perspectives, to hear other perspectives, and think about critically about what they know, right? I think Linda talked about, their how much that they're ingesting from their parents, right? And the beliefs that come through a belief system that they've gotten from very young. And I think that providing that brave space creates in a person, whether it's a student or an adult, the ability to talk about various topics in different situations still remaining respectful, still remaining in the course of dialogue and speaking and listening and reflecting in those spaces, regardless of where those spaces are. And so I think it's really important to understand that you start with the safe space, but your goal is to be able to move into these brave spaces, right? Because regardless of that space, no one's meant to stay there forever, right? It's a training ground, the safe space is really. And so if you stay there too long, there's no forward progress. And the only way that we're going to get progress, and that's, as Linda said earlier, learning to talk to each other, is to be in those places where we're taking a little more risk.
And there are some things that you can do to kind of build these spaces. And so I know one thing that we have community norms. And I know many teachers already do that in their classrooms. Many school communities already have these norms. So what are some of these norms that are important to kind of build in to help create the space? Because it takes time to build it. It doesn't happen automatically, right? You have to kind of build towards having these spaces.
I think so many of the norms are really about expectations of the discussion. And there's actually the last one that we always end with is accept and expect non-closure, right? That this is a limited time conversation, that we're not going to fix everything in the time that we have allotted. But I think it really goes back to creating that sense of trust in the space. And so things like withholding judgment, right? Speaking from the I. Listening for understanding, right? All these things are really important. Leaning into discomfort. I always tell folks that when something is uncomfortable, it tells you that something needs to have attention. You need to have attention sought to it. So whether it's your shoe is too tight or your pants are too tight, like there's something that needs to happen, right? And for you to fix that. And so when you're leaning into discomfort, you know that something is happening. There's an opportunity for change and growth in that moment. So I think really most of them, and we have a whole list of them, but most of them are really about establishing a space of trust and a place that allows people, like I said earlier, to make mistakes, to challenge yourself is one of our community norms, to really think outside what you believe, general respect of the folks in the room is really important as well.
And I think, making sure that, that we're not just sharing them at the beginning of the year and again at the end of the year, but every time, there's going to be some kind of dialogue or discussion in the classroom is just a reminder. And so pretty soon the students just know them. They know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I've started to take the community norms and then asking students, so what are you going to bring? Which one of these are you going to intentionally bring into this? What can you bring? And I think what's wonderful about that is then students really are accountable for their own behavior in the group. It takes the accountability off, kind of like the whole group is looking at you, and it really puts it to the individual to hold themselves accountable for what they say they're going to bring to this group to keep it a safe space or a brave space. So I've toyed around as a facilitator with different ways to bring that into the classroom, but I think that's been really helpful, especially as we've looked at some really pretty difficult issues, controversial issues in the classroom. So, go ahead. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, that our students, they want us to repeat the norms continuously. Like when they are doing a student forum or having a difficult conversation, they invite the norms and want them to be read by an adult. And I actually think that's how they feel safe. They by knowing that these structures are completely consistent. And, you would think that teenagers would kind of be like, who cares about this, or this is boring, we already know this. But they want them written and shown on the screen if we're on Zoom. Many of our classrooms have the norms hanging in them. And I actually think they have a deep appreciation and understanding for clear guidelines so that they can have the difficult conversations and then they can go out into the hallways and be friends with everybody.
That's really helpful, definitely. So, as a dialogue practitioner, I have worked with a lot of schools, a lot of communities, a lot of teachers, and there are pushbacks all the time. Dialogue just doesn't work. We don't have time for it. It's, we need to act. We don't have time to sit around and talk. I mean, all sorts of things. But there are three pushbacks that I've heard quite a bit that really kind of connect with this heat that I want to just dig in a little bit too. So the first is that, and I've heard it from many educators who've said, there's some perspectives shared during dialogue that simply are wrong, that shouldn't have a voice or a platform because they're just wrong. So how would the two of you really talk with an educator who is struggling with the concept of dialogue because they feel like they just don't want to give voice or provide any kind of a platform to a perspective that does not support the human dignity of other students?
Oh, I think, first of all, there's a difference between unpopular perspectives and hate speech. And I think that as an institution, that should, your line should have been drawn way before that you got into any conversation discussion, right? It should be written out and viewable by everyone about what your expectations are, what is going to be tolerated and what isn't going to be tolerated. And I think a lot of that pushback comes with our desire to protect students, which I think is very important. But I do think that hearing those unpopular perspectives is important as we teach students to understand where they come from, right? And that we're all products of our experience and our exposure. And so when you hear this, then you're able to ask the questions, the follow-up questions, why do you say that? What makes you say that? What has been your experience with that, right? And so it's a lot less judgmental to just say, well, what they're saying is wrong. And I believe that many perspectives, not all perspectives are right. I remember when I first started in this, there was a community norm that said honor multiple perspectives. And I said, well, I'm not going to honor every perspective, right? Because every perspective isn't worthy of honor, but I'm going to try to understand as many perspectives as possible, because that helps me understand the work that I need to do and the work that we need to do to move forward and start to make a positive change. And a lot of that is about the behaviors that come with understanding, accepting what a person's perspectives or beliefs are, right? I'm never trying to change a belief. It's really more about your behavior, but you have to understand what those belief systems are. So I think that you have to put in place those community norms, those institutional practices and policies, clear and concise, that says this is what is not tolerated. This is hate speech, and we will not tolerate that under any circumstances, but we're going to allow for this opportunity for us to talk to each other and grow from the perspectives that we hear back and forth.
And I think a necessary question for a student that has a really unpopular belief is, tell me how you came upon that belief or that decision or that idea about this situation, because we should all have a natural curiosity about how people come up with their opinions anyway, but doing that exploration about the background of that thought in some ways has less risk than the student just adhering to the thought and just driving home the thought. Like, how did you get here? Why do you think that? I also think, for teachers forget that what we're trying to teach our students to do is to really think things through. And if you all are of the same mind, you really don't have the opportunity to think about how you got to your opinion. You don't have the chance, that dialectical piece of having somebody have really differing views and a really differing background is how students begin to synthesize and make decisions about their own thoughts and feelings and beliefs.
That's really helpful. Absolutely. And to begin to practice saying that, right? I mean, for many of our students, it's the first time that they're putting, they're practicing, they're saying these things out loud and joining a conversation, really thinking things through. And so being able to have a space where they can do it and to have other students ask questions about it, I think is can be a very powerful kind of learning moment in and of itself. And then to hear that there are other perspectives, maybe they just haven't heard other perspectives because they're hearing one main perspective, in their family or their neighborhood or, their religious institution, their community, wherever they are. So another kind of pushback to dialogue is that why would we put students in a space where they can either be traumatized or maybe re-traumatized by fellow students who disrespect them in some way? And so how do you to really help educators kind of think about that, and what are ways to support students? Because I think there is a fear of educators like, I'm not bringing that up because what if someone says something and then, how do I help the student who's being traumatized by that? And then what do I do with the student who has just said something like that? And it's this real fear of this moment of having a student be traumatized. So how can you help teachers think about that in a dialogue space?
Well, I think a few things need to happen. So first of all, I think, we need to tell students in advance that conversations can be difficult and challenging. And, if need be, to even give a trigger warning so that a student is able to take care of themselves. And one of the things that, we often say, and certainly I said in my prior school as well, is we're about to have a difficult conversation. And remember, here are the people in our school that are available to support you, and can help take care of your emotions. And we do that frequently. We talk about our chaplains, we talk about our school counselors, we talk about administrators, and we also remind our students that all of our teachers are there to listen. And then to make sure that we are providing spaces for folks to feel safe outside of the classroom environment. So in our case, we have affinity group spaces where students are able to be with one another and to share their experiences as well. I think that, this generation of parents in particular is kind of over-focused on protecting kids from really every negative feeling that's out there. And unfortunately, that does not build resilience in our kids at all. And there is a necessity for understanding that that variety of opinion actually exists out there. So I would never want to put a student in a position where somebody is going to be shaming them. But for students to hear that, they may have an opinion or who they are in some way triggers somebody else, is ultimately necessary, because to send an fully unprotected student that's never had, sort of anything negative said to them or about them into the world is doing a disservice for folks. So again, I'm not saying that we should be setting up students to be punching bags, but I think we do need to equip our teenagers to be in conversations that could become difficult, and to be willing to understand that this is just an opinion. Okay, it's someone else's opinion. It doesn't say anything about who they are. It says a lot about who the other person is. So that's how I think we initially need to structure things.
Yeah, I agree. You have to have a plan, right? I think one thing you don't do is go into a conversation without a plan. And that's a plan, as Linda mentioned, and oftentimes I will tell teachers that you need to, pull this kid aside and say, like, listen, this is what we're going to talk about. Let's figure out how to protect you. Like, if it comes too much, this is what you can do. Give me a sign if you need to get up and walk out of class, if you lay your head down. Like, this is about protecting students, but also allowing them, right, to make some decisions about their own vulnerability, right, and how much that they want to experience without this idea of trauma. And I think that, we would never go into anything purposely to traumatize a student, but I think that there are some conversations that end up being painful. And I think that that is a lesson in life. And I think it's how we handle after those painful situations, that's even more important than avoiding those painful situations. You had mentioned, you know, what do we do to the person who said it versus the person who experienced it, right? I mean, you always go to the person who experienced it first, and you take care of them and what happened to them. And there's always time to teach and to talk to the person who had the misstep, whether intentional or not intentional. And I also think it's a really important opportunity to talk about intent and impact when folks are going into these conversations, because oftentimes, you know, the most triggering conversations and discussions have no malintent, right? But they are still very triggering and very painful to some folks. And I think that that's been something that I would say over the last 5 years that our kids have really learned to grasp on, and we hear it regurgitated all the time, you know, especially when they've done something that, you know, has not been looked on as highly as other things that they've done. They'll say, well, I realize now that that wasn't my intent, but the most important thing was the impact. And for that, you know, I understand my reconciliation and the work that I have to do because of the impact. So I think it's an opportunity as well to teach kids that intent and impact are two really important concepts that they need to understand when having conversations of any kind.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's so helpful and insightful. Another and kind of the last, you know, kind of pushback that I want to explore is that, you know, every school, every classroom looks different, right? And many teachers are worried about controversial conversations when they feel that it's often the underrepresented communities that really bear the burden. And oftentimes people will look to certain students for education on it. And that is such a burden. And that's another, you know, can be a very painful experience for the student. And so what is some wisdom around how to handle and really go into a dialogue space, acknowledging that?
Well, I think one of the most important things is we don't ever want to set up a situation where an underrepresented student feels like they are the only representative in a room. That does feel like way too much. And we've worked hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. I do think that as school administrators, it's our job to continuously be reaching out to folks that may feel underrepresented and making sure they understand that they have a voice and a home for that voice, and that to provide ways to sort of enhance their voice, making sure that they have a strong role. And what we want to hear is the student's individual perspective. We don't want any student to have to speak for their entire race or their entire gender or their entire ethnicity or their entire religion. And so we in our school have worked really hard to make sure that that isn't happening, that if we are going to be talking about the Black perspective, for example, we're going to have materials that give us a Black person's perspective, so that we can debate that. And if a student wants to talk about their own perspective, fine, but we're not going to turn to the Black students in the room and say, you know, tell us more about this, or tell us how, you know, how everybody feels about this who's a Black student. And I think that can happen. I think that, you know, there is that burden for an underrepresented student to be the one that's sharing all this information, you know, sort of with the majority people out there. So that sort of speaks to what KiKi was saying in terms of planning. Like, we need to plan in advance to make sure that we are not asking our kids to be the adult teacher in the room.
Right, and that, you know, one thing that I've said in our family groups, which we have for our adult faculty and staff, and in our advisory groups for students, is that it's not your responsibility to teach anything. You know, this is your story. You share it to the extent you're comfortable. And in the moment that it feels traumatizing, then that's your right and your privilege. It's your story. You have ownership of it, and you have ownership of how much you give and how much you share. It's a gift, right? So anytime that a person from an underrepresented community, whether, like Linda said, it be a person of color or person in the LGBTQ community, and whenever they give of their story, it's a gift, right? And so you determine how much you give and when you give it and when you do not give it. The work has to be on the other group of folks, right, to do the work. We're in a situation now where you can find out anything, right, if you really want to do the work. And so I think as the adults, especially when it comes to kids, it's up to us to help them navigate finding that work. And so we have a responsibility, but it is really about being intentional, about the conversations you have before the larger conversations with these groups of folks who might be underrepresented in your community, and the conversation you have with the majority, right, about how this is going to work, right? That, so-and-so doesn't know how every, trans person feels, and so doesn't know how every Black person or Latino person feels. So we're not gonna go that way, right? So I think we've really been very intentional in everything from how we set up classes and spaces and advisories, who's in the advisory, and what adult is there in the advisory, to make sure that there's someone who can navigate, and really saying, after these conversations, if you need to talk further, there's spaces for you to do that as well. So I think being very intentional has been really important.
And I do think it's our job as adults to be checking in with our underrepresented folks sort of before, during, and after. That means, an enormous amount to a student. Like, recognizing a student and their perspective is like a huge part of our job. Understanding that may have been difficult for them, or that something was said that could be difficult. And, I think that's the place that adults can do a much better job, is making sure that if we felt it or saw it, guaranteed that the student felt it and saw it. So to make sure that you're going back and saying, was that okay for you? Was that
thank you.
And thank you. Exactly. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
And we've really focused on students, but let's think about the teachers and the training that teachers need and support, to be able to, have these conversations. So, what's your advice for teachers just really looking for more professional development around this, for feeling more confident? I know in our school community, we've had lots of teachers say, we need more. So what are some of the things that you've shared with teachers in our community who are really looking to grow and develop these skills themselves as facilitators in the classroom?
So I think what's so hard for teachers is they want to be the experts. Like, they want to be able to teach the material rather than just hear different perspectives. And so, we've been trying to say that, to be a compassionate individual, to be a good listener, you don't need to know anything in advance. You just need to be willing to listen. And, also to be in touch with how you feel about something and how your students are feeling about something. So that's probably been, one of the harder pieces for our faculty, because they end up feeling a little inadequate to the task when, honestly, I feel like all of our faculty members are fully adequate to the task. There are particularly people that are sort of have a more mathematical or scientific mind, where, I think they need a little help facilitating, because the art of the open-ended question, or sort of, the sort of supportive things that you need to say after someone is shared, might not come as naturally to them. So I think providing facilitation training and, learning how to be comfortable in silence, that's another piece I think that's been tough for our faculty, but is so important, because in the silence, if you're quiet long enough, it is amazing what will come out of that, because students will speak, teenagers will speak. So not being uncomfortable, or allowing yourself to be a little uncomfortable, and sort of just leaning hard into that feeling, that awkward feeling, and seeing what comes out of it.
I think so much of it's fear-based, right? And I think one thing that I always say, that the main thing that we want you to do is, and I know you know how to do it because you do it every day in your classes, be the adult in the room, right? So that's the most important thing. And like we had said earlier, when we talked about community norms and setting those boundaries, that provides probably the greatest sense of safety for this kids, more than anything you do or say, right? Knowing that there's an adult in the room. And if you're confident in your ability to do in a facilitation type of way what you would do in a classroom way, interrupt something that is not okay, right? And I always tell them, you don't even have to know why it's not okay, right? It's absolutely okay to say like, hey, listen, this doesn't feel okay. This isn't right. We're going to come back to this, but we're going to stop this because I feel like there's some people who are being triggered or feeling a little upset right now. So let's take a minute. Let's take a minute and let's journal, or let's think about, you know, some of the emotions that are happening right now. And so I think, you know, calming teachers into letting them know is that this is what you do, right? This is what you do. It might not be in the structure that we're doing it now, but, and also letting them know that the support is there, right? And that as the students are learning, they're learning, and we accept that this is a journey that everyone starts in a certain place, right? And that we are there to help them navigate this journey as they are there to help the students navigate the journey. And it's not about being an expert. It's about knowing how to approach and situations that might feel like it needs an adult in the room, right? So if someone says something and you can see that someone is hurt or someone's putting their head down, like you have to gauge what's going on. And so like Linda said, we tried to provide handbooks and facilitation and just the opportunity to engage with folks who may have done it longer and be more confident and competent in it. But I think it's more about them giving themselves grace in doing this work and having those high expectations that I tell them you're not going to break a kid, right? You're not going to break them. And that this is just an opportunity to learn and grow together.
Do you think it's important to teach students, you know, what is happening in their brain and why they might be responding in the way that they are? Do you see that this is an important piece of information as you're kind of teaching the dialogue skills as well? Is that helpful? Linda, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, well, because I have a dream that, you know, all schools should teach mindfulness as like a subject matter, starting like in the lower school and going, sorry, I've got dogs that are barking, that, you know, and that go all the way through to the upper school. Because the piece about mindfulness is, you do begin to be aware of your set of emotions, your set of feelings in the moment. And it really does build a sense of like self-control. And it also builds like a sense of confidence. Because I think that teenagers are completely overwhelmed by all that's happening. And so giving them a small amount of information, you know, we know that students with learning disabilities, when they have testing and someone carefully goes through the testing with them to outline their strengths and challenges, that it helps immeasurably because they have an understanding for who they are and what works. And it's also like super validating, like, yeah, that's why this was going on. Yeah, that's why I all of a sudden felt like I was going to cry. You know, why do I cry when I'm so angry? I feel so angry, but why am I crying? So helping folks understand that that's what emotional flooding is. And when you're emotionally flooded, your insides aren't really able to differentiate, which is why sometimes you can end up laughing when you're crying, and crying when you're laughing.
Are there particular, I know both of you have mentioned things, you know, when you're in the moment, what you can do. KiKi, you mentioned a minute ago, you know, stopping and journaling. You know, Linda, you're, you know, talking about having this knowledge already so you can recognize what it's happening, when it's happening and what's triggered you. Are there things that teachers can do in that moment that can help students really be able to get to a place where they can engage in dialogue? Because sometimes that emotion can stop the ability to listen and to have compassion and to see and understand nuance or hear a different perspective in that moment. Are there things that can be done in that moment?
Well, I mean, Linda talked a lot about mindfulness, but, you know, as a community, we had Dr. Howard Stevenson come earlier. So along with those community norms, we talked about his CLCBE method of resolving or interrupting stressful situations, particularly around race, but stressful situations. And so it's really just this idea about calculating like how intense you're feeling right now. So it really comes down to stopping in the moment though, right? Stopping in the moment, like interrupting all the craziness, whether it's internally or external craziness that's happening, and seeing what's actually happening, right? So locate like what's happening, how stressful are you? Locating where do you feel that stress on your body? Are your hands sweaty? Are your knees shaking? Is your heart pounding? And are you able to communicate that to yourself before you can communicate it with others, right? So that might be an opportunity for journaling, right? And saying, like, what does this mean for me, right? What are the stories that I'm telling myself when I'm feeling this way? Everyone's looking at me. I said something stupid. Everyone thinks I'm a racist, right? So what are you communicating to yourself? And then really taking that moment to breathe and slowly and exhale even slowly, right? Because we know that that just changes the metabolism, how your body is working in that moment. And so that's one method. I mean, I think there's lots of methods out there, but I think it's really about interrupting whatever is happening in that moment.
And I think finding the location of the feeling is so important. You know, am I feeling it like in my gut? Am I feeling it in my head? You know, is my face all flushed? And, you know, as you're breathing, sort of locating that sense of feeling, because then you begin to own it and it doesn't feel like the feeling is like attacking you, that it's your own set of feelings. It's your, you know, it's your own emotional self that's creating these different feelings in your body. So slowing it down is so important. And it's just,
and then you can control it, right?
Right.
If it's not external, if you know there's something that's happening, not happening to you, but happening within you, then you have that control over it, which I think is really important.
Exactly.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, but if there are some questions from our audience, anything you're curious about, a comment you have, a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat. And while we're waiting for any questions to appear, I just want to ask KiKi and Linda, is there anything that you really want to say that you haven't said that you think is really important that those who have joined the webinar today really know about kind of the heat, you know, what it looks like, how to help move through it, and how to create, you know, the safe and brave spaces and why that's so important, especially now at this time in history?
Well, I think, you know, we all keep talking about just how polarized we are as a nation. And I know that some folks have said, you know, like, I'm done talking to the other side. I don't really want to hear what they have to say. I think when it comes to sort of teenagers and younger people, however, it is really important that we are giving them the skill set to listen to one another. I mean, they're our best hope at this point. And they may be better trained to be able to do that than we actually were and are. To be able, because they will have grown up in this really polarized environment, and they have to learn to live with one another. And so, like, I think there's something we could also learn from teenagers, which is they can get good and mad at one another and really not agree at all politically or about some of these issues, and then go play basketball on the basketball court and really enjoy one another. So they're a little bit more willing to sometimes see past that in a different atmosphere. And so that's something for us to learn.
Yeah, I agree. I think giving them the space to do this, believing that they can do it and succeed in it, I think it's really important. This is a learning opportunity, a growth opportunity for them, that they're learning a skill, right? A skill set that they're going to take beyond. When I talk to parents about creating, you know, culturally competent kids, I say, listen, the probability that your kid is going to be working with or for someone who is from a different culture, a set of beliefs from them, is 100% at this point. It wasn't, you know, when I was out of high school, it was probably a little less of this, but our world has become so much smaller. And so we, just like we give our kids the opportunity to practice other skills, writing skills, speaking skills, critical thinking skills around math and analytical skills. So do we need to find the space to do this, because this is an integral part of learning, of how you navigate situations in and out of the classroom. So I think that providing that space, making it a priority, is really important.
There is so much that we learn from our students. I know in the classroom, I learn so much every day from them, which is fantastic. And I think they do. I think they are gonna, be leading us and guiding us, and hopefully they'll feel very equipped as the world continues to be incredibly complex, but they'll have the skills needed to really navigate that complexity. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and very, very special thank you to KiKi and Linda, who are just amazing women, and it's always so incredible to have conversations with you and engage in dialogue with you, and to be able to figure all this out together with you, because it's complicated and we need our peers, we need our colleagues. It takes a lot of brains to figure this out. And so it's been an honor to really be able to work with them and to help build something in pretty special, I think, in our school community. There is still more to do, but it's pretty unique and pretty special. So I hope that you will reach out to Freedom Forum or to the Religious Freedom Center if you want to be in touch with any one of us. I really want to thank again the generous support from Templeton Religion Trust, from Andrew and Julie Klingenstein Family Fund, and from the Cousins Foundation for making this webinar series really happen. And I encourage you to check out the other webinars in the series. There'll be 5 in all, and they're all looking at different aspects of dialogue. And so I hope if you're interested, you'll continue to learn and to grow in your own school community and in your own work. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening. Great to see you.